Okay, guys, so today I want to teach you a reading strategy that you can use when you're reading any type of story. It could be a short story, it could be a novel, it could be, something that you're doing in class that's a story. And a lot of times when we're reading a story, if we answer some important questions about the main character, about the setting, and we jot those down, it will really help us when we start having to comprehend what we've read. Now, a lot of us can sometimes remember what we've read. That's called recall. But in order to comprehend, that means that you're able to really understand. It's a step further than being able to just recall the names of the main characters, but you may can start to comprehend maybe why this was written or is there an underlying message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the story of Little Red Riding Hood to kind of use as an example as why I go through this. This is like just a questioning strategy that's really good to help strengthen your reading comprehension. And it's something that I hope that you will try to use. A lot of times, if I'm reading a story that I'm planning on teaching to my students, I want to make sure that I do this with myself, and sometimes I jot this down. So today, that's what we're going to focus on, and we're going to use the story of the Little Red Riding Hood because all of us are kind of familiar with that to begin with. Okay, there's several questions that what you're going to do is while you're reading your short story, something that you may be reading an epic poem like Beowulf or Macbeth or something like that, like a play. Whatever the story is, whatever the format, you can always ask these questions. So the first thing you're going to do, I have right here, I'm going to highlight it for you, is you're going to describe the personality of the main characters. Okay, so in this case, our two main characters are Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf. All right, so we know that Little Red Riding Hood, she's probably caring. She's probably sweet. She's going to see her grandmother. There are lots of things that we can say there. She's maybe innocent. You know, we think of a child being innocent. She's in that cape, skipping along to grandmother's house. Then we see the big bad wolf. Now, we know from prior knowledge of things like fairy tales, we may even say that the wolf is sneaky and dangerous because as the reader, we may think, uh-oh, the big bad wolf is up to no good, but Little Red Riding Hood is so innocent and so caring that she's just going to talk to the big bad wolf anyway. So that's the first thing you're going to do is you're going to kind of figure out the personalities of the main character. What in the reading can you see that's going to tell you about these characters? What inferences or what information is the author giving you? What types of things can you infer or predict about what's going on with those characters? All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing you're going to do, I'm going to highlight this right here, is you're going to think about any other important characters in the story and kind of what are their qualities. What about the other characters do we need to know? So the only other character in the story is the grandmother. And what do we know about the grandmother? We know that she is sick, that she's in bed, and her granddaughter is going to see her. So I just kind of make a note of that right there under. You can see right there. Grandmother's at home, she's sick, and she's in the bed.
If you have parked in front of the cafeteria, you will need to move your cars due to lunches are going to be given out. Thank you.
All right, so this next one is what are the details of the setting of the story. So we know that the setting of the story is the time and the place where all this stuff is taking place. Now, in the magical world of A Little Red Riding Hood, with it being a fairy tale, we don't necessarily have a town, but we kind of know that it's probably in a land far away or it's in the woods, maybe in the past. It probably is taking place in the morning because if you think about it, if Little Red Riding Hood's going to see her grandmother, she's not going to start out at night to go see her grandmother. So those are just some things that we can kind of infer or maybe make guesses and go ahead and write that down. It may take place in, you can even go as far as to say it takes place in London, England, or a place like that. You can make up your own imaginary place, but go ahead and do that. Okay, so the next question you want to ask is what types of, let me highlight this better, challenges are the main characters facing? What are the challenges? So we know that there's a challenge immediately. Little Red Riding Hood is going to see her grandmother, and we want her to arrive there safely. Okay, so that's the challenge. The wolf, on the other hand, he has a challenge because we know as the reader that he really wants to eat Little Red Riding Hood. So we know that he may be dangerous. So he's got some challenges himself too. So I've kind of jotted those down. So after you do that, let's rewind, go to the next question. So, how did the main characters respond to the development in the story? Now, this story, we know that Little Red Riding Hood gets to her grandmother's house and she looks at her grandmother and she's like, "My grandmother, what big eyes you have." And it's really the big bad wolf. And the big bad wolf is like, "Well, to better to see you, my child." So we know that Little Red Riding Hood is really looking at her grandmother and thinking, is this really my grandmother? And the big bad wolf, what we know then is he has snuck into the grandmother's house. He has gotten into the grandmother's bed, put her nightgown and cap on, and we find out at the end that he is really acting like he's the grandmother. So in this particular story, we are left with making a decision. What happens? Okay, what happens to Little Red Riding Hood? What happened to the grandmother? And so, it's interesting because this particular story has been told a lot of different ways. You could sit there and kind of come up with your own meaning, but the author lets us know through this story that he has a message. And that's the very last thing we're going to talk about is what theme or lesson do you think this story has? Now, we could all probably have our own ideas, but I think it's pretty safe to say that the theme of Little Red Riding Hood is maybe to trust, that you need to really be careful who you trust, or people aren't always who they assume to be or assume to be. And so those are just some questions that when you go through any story, if you can answer those questions and formulate a good idea, then it will really help you be able to kind of set yourself up for success when you start answering questions. So I hope this has been helpful. Feel free to jot those down or refer back to this at any time. I will also type these questions up and make like a little bookmark type thing for you guys that you can use as you're doing your reading. All right. Until next time. Bye.